what came to mind when I was reading these and kind of going over it and thinking what to share is a phrase that my mum used to use. And I don't know if this is like a common phrase or not. But my mum used to have this phrase, and she used to say it every time somebody got her really frustrated. Like, she would explain something and explain it again, and they still wouldn't get it. And here's the phrase: there's none so blind as them as will not see. Is that a phrase that other people use? There's none so blind as them as will not see. And what the thing about that phrase is, maybe you've actually thought that about some people when they've got you like people used to get my mum. And maybe you've kind of applied it to lots of people or even just a few people. And maybe you sat there and you've got somebody in mind right now. And maybe some people have applied that to you. When you don't know. Maybe they have. And that's kind of the point, really, isn't it? That if somebody was actually saying that about us, we'd never know, and we wouldn't realise anyway, because there's none so blind as them as can't see. So we wouldn't actually know. And in the absence of knowing, in the absence of enlightenment, light, then we've only got darkness to go. We've only got what goes on in our own heads and our own thoughts. And when it's dark and you can't see stuff, it's actually hard to see where you're going. And, for a lot of people, their experience of faith and their experience of life is they set off, and it's very, very positive. But they make some decisions along the way, and they do some things along the way. They get caught up in some stuff along the way, and they head off down this path that gets narrower and narrower and darker till it seems like they're stuck. And they get to a point where they just need somebody to throw some light into it. But because they've got themselves there and made choices and so on, they need help. They need help to be able to see. And that's kind of where we're going at the moment, because as Pete said last week, each of these signs of Jesus is connected to something that happened in the Old Testament to the children of Israel. And it revolves around a celebration, a festival that they have that celebrates something that happened in the Old Testament. But before we kind of get to this sixth sign, it's kind of the run-up to it that's really interesting. And I want to share that with you so you can kind of get where Jesus is coming from and why he actually ends up doing this particular miracle. And what's happened is Jesus is at the temple. And he keeps going to the temple, doesn't he, in John's Gospel. So John's with him, and all the other disciples are with him. And it's something called the Feast of Tabernacles. It's one of the Jewish feasts where they celebrate the things that went on when they were in the wilderness, having been freed from Egypt. And at various points in this feast, there's specific events, specific like bits of the celebration. And these things used to take place over days. But the specific events that take place. And what they're doing is they are celebrating and remembering how God led them in the desert. You remember, perhaps if you're familiar with the story, that when God had freed Israel from slavery in Egypt, they were in the desert, and he led them by fire by day, light by day, a fire, and a cloud by night. And they just followed the cloud. Sorry, that's the wrong way around. Fire by night, cloud by day, yeah. And so they just followed this, and they followed God, and they had to follow him closely. And the kind of what's happening by the time we get to Jesus turning up his festival is all the religious leaders have made their mind up about him. And they want him dead. And they set out to trap him. And throughout this event, what we're going to explore, really, one of the things that we need to see and understand about it is this. What Jesus is saying is you should have been able to see who I am, because the evidence is right before your eyes. But there's none so blind as those who won't see. In other words, Jesus is saying, you've got everything in front of you, and you are still choosing to not understand who I am. So let's pick up the story. The Jewish leaders tried to find him at the festival and kept asking if anyone had seen him. And there was a lot of grumbling amongst the crowds. We never grumble in England, do we? No, this just imagine, you got to use a bit of imagination. But they're grumbling. Some even they're arguing. He's a good man. But others said, he's nothing but a fraud who's deceiving the people. But no one had the courage to speak favorably about Jesus in public. Why? Because they were afraid of getting into trouble with the religious Jewish leaders. So there's kind of a load of people who want to follow Jesus and are behind Jesus and have kind of understood who he is, but they're afraid to say so in public because of the pressure that's been exerted by these religious Jewish leaders. And into all this, with the Jewish leaders setting up trap here, all this kind of stuff going on, people being afraid to actually be honest and open, right into the middle of that steps Jesus. And he begins to teach. And as he teaches, the people are amazed. Like, it's good teaching, but what they're amazed about is what it shows about him and the authority that he speaks with. And in this teaching, he says something which is straight at his critics. Have you ever wanted to kind of hit back at your critics? And he says this, that he basically implies that the signs, the miracles that he has done, it should have convinced everyone and anyone of who he is. And this is what he says. My message is not my own. It comes from God who sent me. Anyone who wants to do the will of God will know whether my teaching is from God or is merely my own. That's really incredible, isn't it? Those who speak for themselves, the religious leaders and people who didn't want to follow him, they only want glory for themselves. They want to, what he's saying there is they want to pull you away from me to themselves. They want to attract you to them because they don't recognize that what has been said here and done here is actually from God. And Jesus is kind of warning the people, don't fall for this. This is a deception. People's motives in criticizing me aren't because they're honestly trying to warn you. They're trying to pull you to themselves because they want to control you. They want you on their side. They want you following them and not me. So he's saying their motives aren't real. Moses gave you the law, but none of you obeys it. In fact, you're trying to kill me. So that's quite a statement, isn't it? And in that statement, he's saying two things. Firstly, he's saying the way to test the validity of his teaching is that if you are genuinely seeking to follow God's ways, you will know it's true. Now, for us as New Testament, New Covenant believers, this side, after Jesus has been raised from the dead, spoiler alert, yeah, ascended into heaven. Us, for who are benefiting from what he's done, we have the Holy Spirit to testify to us what's true. And Jesus is saying there's a quality that when we hear the truth, our spirit should be able to recognize it. What he's saying is those who want to walk in the light can discern where the light is. Those who don't want to walk in the light, those who've set their hearts that whatever's put in front of them, they're not going to follow, they can't discern what's true or not. And this is the second thing he says. Those who are plotting against him, these people who are trying to pull the people away from him, those who are plotting against him are actually doing what they accused him of previously. Remember, they're always telling him how he's breaking the Sabbath law by healing people and doing good things. And Jesus is saying, you criticize me for that, but you're actually trying to murder me. You are just total. Jesus is actually saying you're a total hypocrite because you're not even following and living out what you say. So really strong statements. Like you can tell we're kind of getting to a point where the rubber's going to hit the road, can't you, in this story? And it continues. While Jesus was teaching in the temple, he called out, "I am not here on my own. The one who sent me is true, and you don't know him." But, of course, everybody who's listening thinks they know him because they're Jews. They all think, we know God. And Jesus said, no, you don't. Because you're not like him. And you're not even living what you say you should be living. But I know him because I come from him, and he sent me to you. There, just get that. He's just claimed to be straight from God. And this is the reaction he gets. Then the leaders tried to arrest him, but no one laid a hand on him because his time had not yet come. Explanation of that, Jesus had already said, it's up to me when I lay down my life. And until I decide, God's with me and God's for me, and I will not let you touch me. Many among the crowds at the temple believed in him. After all, they said, would you expect the Messiah to do more miraculous signs than this guy has done? In other words, we recognize this is Messiah. So there's a polarization taking place. And the religious leaders aren't liking this at all. So, what they say is saying is those who were actually willing to change and follow Jesus and were able to see who he was. Those who chose to be blind, because this is a choice they're making. That's what Jesus is pointing out. You are choosing to be blind. Those who choose to be blind cannot see at all. And that's why we have to be careful that we don't get ourselves so entrenched in our own little world that we can't see what Jesus is doing and what Jesus wants of us. So let's zoom ahead. Zoom ahead in the story. Now I've given you that bit of background. Jesus comes back to the temple a second time. Same trip, second visit to the temple. And it's still the Feast of Tabernacles. And he's standing in a particular area of the temple called the Court of the Women. And it's called the Court of the Women because that's the only bit that women were allowed into. After that, you had to be a guy. So it's the Court of the Women. And in the area of the Court of Women is the treasury. And Cheryl's thinking, this is cool. The girls get the money. She's thinking, this is great. So all the girls just think you're trustworthy with the money. Yeah. So it's the area of the treasury. At the end of the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, what happened was there was this ritual or this event that was carried out. And it was called the Festival of Lights. So what we're going to see is what Jesus is going to do takes place in the middle of this Festival of Lights. And what the Festival of Lights was about is it was to celebrate when they were being led by the fire by night. And they had these 4 huge gold lamps, and they would light them, and then they go into praise and worship and singing and shouting, big celebration. And the light from these lamps was so bright, it lit the whole city up. It must have been huge fires in each of them. And just as it gets to the end of this Festival of Lights, as they're extinguishing the lights, Jesus stands up and he says, I am the true light of the world. Not only for Israel, like they followed the fire in the desert, but I am the light of the world for everyone. Okay, massive claim. If you want to upset the religious guys, that's the way to do it. So Jesus spoke to people once more and said, I am the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness anymore. Because you have the light that leads to life. The only way to know and be successful and fulfilled and at peace in life is to have sufficient light to know where you're going and not end up down those paths of darkness. And that's why Jesus came. That's the light that he is to us. He illuminates the best course for our life. And he says this, and of course, there's none so blind as them as will not see. And the leaders don't get it because they don't want to get it. They've got no intention of ever changing anything, ever listening to anything other than what they already think they know. So they don't get it and they want him dead. And Jesus stands up right in front of him and he says, Jesus told them, if God was your father, you would love me. In other words, God's not your father, even though you think he is. Because I have come to you from God. I'm not here on my own, but he sent me. Why can't you understand what I'm saying? It's because you can't even hear me. He's not saying they're deaf. He's saying they're choosing that they will not hear because it doesn't fit with what they want and what they think and what their livelihood's based on and their reputation and their standing. They cannot see because they will not hear. And as all this is going on, the temperature of the crowd raises a few degrees even more. And they start arguing. And there's arguments in the crowd, arguments amongst the religious people. The whole place falls into an argument. And there's this big claim comes out. Of course, God is our Father because we're descended from Abraham. And Jesus I just think he looks at them. And he goes, God told Abraham that you're blessed to be a blessing. And you guys want to keep it all to yourself. You just want to be this little tribe, this little nation who does nothing for anybody who's not already part of their club. It's just like shocking, isn't it? Jesus said the whole purpose of God calling Israel and all the descendants of Abraham was that you would be blessed to be a blessing to all the nations and you would draw people to me because you showed them so much blessing. And that translated by Jesus' day to this is how we do it, this is how we've always done it, this is who we are, and nobody gets in, and we've got all these rules and we'll keep everybody out. And you know, right through history, churches have gone through that same thought processes and got them there. And we can't afford to. In our day, the mission is too urgent. The harvest is ready. And God's short of labourers. And he needs us to not be those people who put all these barriers up and say, we just want to be who we are and nobody else is getting in. We are here to be a blessing to everybody we come into contact with. So Jesus answered, I tell you the truth, before Abraham was even born, I am. At that point, they picked up stones to throw at him. They're going to kill him. But Jesus was, this is a miracle, not the one I'm going to talk about. Jesus is hidden from them and left the temple. When Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am, the reason they pick up the stones and they're going to kill him is I am is God's name. That's the name he revealed to Moses in the desert. That's his name. And what Jesus is saying is, before Abraham even existed, I am God. That's why they want to kill him. Because they're going, we don't accept you as our God. because you don't fit our picture. And Jesus says, you don't keep your own rules. Okay, then here's where we go. So with all that, that was the background. We're going to get to our sixth sign. And it's a good one. Okay, it's not as good as next week. Next week's my favourite. Next week's Lazarus. Okay, Lazarus is cool. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. Rabbi, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins? Jesus answered, it was not because of his sins or his parents' sins. This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. We must quickly carry out the tasks assigned us by the one who sent us. The night is coming and then no one can work. But while I am here in the world, I am the light of the world. Just before I'm going off script, somebody said something this week that I was speaking at a conference, and so it wasn't me, but somebody else said this. You know, there's things that we can do now we will never, ever get the opportunity to do again in eternity. You never, ever get the opportunity to save anybody in eternity. You never get the opportunity to heal anybody. You never get the opportunity to deliver anybody. It stops when you die. There's so many things we can enjoy and get fun with and just following God right now that we'll never have an opportunity to do again. We should be doing them every second if we could, because when eternity comes, we never get another go. How cool is it to see people healed? How amazing is it to see people saved? You won't be doing that in eternity, so you might as well have a go now. Have some fun. Anyway, let me get back to it. Then Jesus goes weird on him. He spits on the ground and makes mud with the spit. And he spreads the mud over the blind man's eyes. And I'm thinking, like if I'm John and I'm stood next to Jesus at this point, I've got my hands over my eyes and I'm going, what is he doing now? Oh. Go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. Siloam means sent. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. His neighbours and others who knew him as a blind beggar asked each other, isn't this the man who used to sit and beg? Some said he was, and others said, no, he just looks like him. Because it's kind of a big miracle, isn't it? Blind from birth, this guy. But the beggar kept saying, I am him. Me. Look at me. I am him. I am him. And they asked, who healed you? What happened? And he said, the man they called Jesus, he made mud and he splattered it on my eyes. And then he told me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash yourself. So I did. And now I can see. How cool is that? And Jesus does this miracle to prove he is who he says he is. That he is the light of the world. That he can bring light into the darkest darkness. He can open up all the darkness in our life and change it to light and set us free. He is the true light of the world. So, let's get back. Let's pull that story and unpack it. The story starts with a question, doesn't it? The disciples come to him and say, so Jesus doesn't go to this guy. The guy doesn't go to Jesus. The disciples have spotted him and they think here's a good opportunity for Jesus to do one of his great little teaching sessions. And we like the teaching sessions. We love the teaching sessions. And so we'll ask Jesus, why is this man born blind? Was it his sin or his parents' sin? Now, spoiler alert, Jesus says, wrong, neither of those. But here's the point. They're actually saying, if you think about it, did this guy, did he sin in the womb? Like, where are they getting this stuff from? And if he didn't sin in the womb, then it must have been his parents' sin before he was even born. And Jesus says, no, 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 it's not that. And here's the point. These disciples were looking for a direct link between sin and suffering. Because that seems right, doesn't it? Don't you wish you lived in a world where good people only got good things? And bad things only happen to bad people? But we know ourselves that's not true, is it? That's not how life works. Life isn't fair. Nor is it logical, and nor can you always trace directly why something bad happens to good people and good things happen to bad people get good things. But it's really annoying when really bad people do really well, isn't it? Particularly if you think you're a good person and you're struggling at the moment. And that's kind of where Jesus is going with his answer to this question. Because the disciples have tried to narrow it down and they're going, well, okay, is it his sin in the womb or is it his parents' sin? And Jesus is going, no, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. But because we like formulas, we'd like it to work like that. We know it doesn't work like that, but we can spend years in angst trying to work out why something happened to somebody, or why this happened to me, or why that happened to somebody else. And Jesus is throwing his answer to that question into here right now for you to hear. If you were a religious guy listening to this conversation, or even if you were the disciples themselves, they should have known that that was the wrong answer anyway. Because in the Old Testament, this whole idea gets explored in a book called the Book of Job. And in that, God himself directly tells people who were trying to go, well, you must have sinned, so this happened to you. You must have done that, so this happened. You must have done really bad things for that to happen to you. And God actually tells people that they are speaking with no understanding. That is wrong. So they should have kind of known that there wasn't this direct link. But by the time Jesus is walking the earth, they've kind of got themselves all over that, and they're looking for a formula, because the formula really helps them. Because they saw themselves as good people. The religious authorities saw themselves as good people and didn't want anything to do with bad people, because they're the people who were suffering and people who were in pain and people who were struggling and people who were not like them and people who were, in their eyes, weren't good enough. They didn't want anything to do with them, because they could say, the reason like that is they're bad sinners and we're good people. They were self-righteous. And it ticked their boxes. They liked it, thinking like that. And so the reality, which we know, is that sin and suffering do not directly correlate. Suffering is too complicated for a formula. Now, just before you think I've completely lost my trolley, of course, some stupid things that you do or other people do to themselves or decisions we make, yes, they result in pain. Some of them will result in sickness. Some of them will result in suffering. You drink yourself to oblivion every night, your liver is not going to be happy. You engage in promiscuous sex, you're likely to catch something. You know, sin and suffering are connected, but it's not direct and it's not always a predictable outcome. So just understand, I'm not saying do naughty things and you can get away with it. Just caveat that. Don't go home and say, Mark said it's not connected, so we can do naughty things and it won't have any effect. It will. It will. It won't do you any good at all. But here's the thing. Suffering's too complicated to make a formula out of. And the reason for that is when man originally fell, death and sin entered into the world. And that affects everything. It affects the world we live in. The planet itself struggles with the effects of that. We struggle in our bodies with aging and sickness and eventually dying and getting old and creaky knees and bad backs and struggling with our eyes and all these sort of things. And that's a result of sin and death entering the world as man fell. But you can't come up with a lovely formula that says, do that, you get that. Because you make some choices in your life. And other people make choices in their lives. And some of those other people who make choices in their lives, they're nice people and want good things for you. But some of those people who make their choices are bad people. And they cause bad things to happen. And you do stupid things. Honestly, I'm not asking you to put your hand up. If you want to put your hand up, how many people just can think right now of stupid things that they have done? Stupid choices that they have done with their life? Yeah, you see? There's few honest people. The rest of you are fibbing. But we do that. And then there's an enemy who just wants bad things for you. He comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Now, you multiply all that. You multiply all those choices, all those random things, all the effects of sin and death in the world across 6.5 billion people. You are not going to be able to predict all the interactions, all the outcomes, and why good things go to bad people sometimes and bad things happen to good people. It's just not possible. And Jesus knows that. But he uses the question to do something else. And this is what he says. He makes 2 points. The first one is this: a person's suffering is an opportunity for God's grace and power to be displayed for his glory. In other words, it's not the end of the story. It's an opportunity for God to get involved. And the way God gets involved is through me and you. We are his legs on planet Earth. We are his voice on planet Earth. We are his arms and eyes and mouth on planet Earth. And the second thing he says is the existence of suffering and pain in the world is a call to work for those who follow Jesus. It is not something for reflection or discussion or debate or theological dissertations or religious sermons. It's a call to work. And Jesus is saying, if you see somewhere you can help, if you see somebody you can reach, if you see somebody you can pray for, you must do it. It's a call to work. And the problem with so many of us over the years is we've taken this as a call to discuss. And it's not, it's a call to work. What does Jesus do next? This is the fun bit. I've got to he spits on the ground, makes mud, and spreads it over the blind man's eyes. Now, I don't know how you'd have felt if somebody did that to you. But that's what he did. Yeah? So I'm speculating here, why would Jesus do that? He only did. By the way, you know I said it was a call to work? You don't have to spit at people and you don't have to rub mud on people's eyes. Jesus only did that once. So we can kind of try and work out why he would do that. And actually, one of the things that I found is kind of, I've read loads of commentaries on it, and none of them really say anything. They kind of avoid the question. So here's my guess. It's a guess, okay? Don't shoot me or anything like that. This is my guess. I think he's working out a visual aid. You know my visual aids? I'm so glad to see Logie and Louise again, because I could bring back visual aids for you to ruin immediately, Logie. But anyway, my visual aids always go wrong, so I'm not going to do one, okay? But I think this is a visual aid. And here's what I think that Jesus is showing us through this. That no matter what the world has done to us, no matter what choices we've made, no matter how much mud sticks on us, how much dirt we carry, no matter what we've done to get there and what other people did to us that caused us to get there, if we'll simply do what he asks, he has the power to open our eyes again and bring light into our life. And I think that's what he's doing. Because it's not the mud that heals. It's the fact that he then tells him to go to the pool of Siloam and wash it off. And that's where we get to the really exciting bit. You do not, if you go away with nothing else from today, this is what I want you to go away with. Okay? You do not want to miss the implications of this story for you. If you miss this, it's a story. And you're coming back and you're going, I hope next week's story is better than that one. But you don't want to miss the implications of this for you because it's huge. So Jesus tells him, go. Just like he says to you and me. And he tells him to wash in the pool of Siloam. And this is where you come in. Whenever you see Jesus teaching or doing a miracle or telling a parable in the Bible, one of the questions you should ask yourself is, where am I in this story? What's this for me? Here's how you fit in the story. Because this blind man gets to do something for the first time in history that God asks of everyone in this room who follows him. This blind man walks by faith, not by sight. Literally. Literally, he's blind. And he goes to the pool of Siloam. Blind. He did what your Heavenly Father would love you to do in every aspect of your life. He chose to trust in Jesus, not based on what he saw, but what had been promised. He chose to take Jesus at his word and go anyway, even though he didn't imagine how this was going to work out, how he couldn't think this was going to work out. But he chose to follow Jesus and do what Jesus asked, even though physically and mentally and all the rest of it, he had no idea how this could ever turn out. And Jesus asks us to live our lives that way, with our eyes on him, walking by faith, not by sight. And what happens to this guy? He's healed, just like Jesus promised. A few years later, one of Jesus' followers, one who went across a lot of the Roman Empire, proclaiming Jesus, teaching people about Jesus, planting churches and establishing those churches, a guy called Paul, originally hated Christians, but had an encounter with Jesus, and he turned his life around. In one of his letters to these churches, and it's a theme that he talks about quite a lot, he says this: for we walk by faith, not by sight. And you know, it's so easy when stuff's going on in our life, when we don't feel so well, when we're struggling with something that's going on, when our finances are out of kilter, when our life's out of kilter, when we've got ourselves stuck in stuff that we don't know how to get out of, and it just seems so difficult. Jesus says we walk by faith. Because you can't see how a supernatural God who could create the universe can sort out something that isn't possible in the natural. If you could work it out, you would have worked it out and you would have sorted it out. It's the very fact that we can't work it out that makes Jesus so amazing and so good. The Greek word for faith in that is the word pistis. It's kind of cool word. It's pistis. And the thing about that sort of faith, that word, is it's an active word. It's not passive. You know, like you have different tenses. This is an active word. And it means loyal, devoted trust that involves your whole being, body, soul, spirit, and energy in placing your reliance on Jesus. That's what it means. So the question for us is the same as it was for that guy. Will we walk by faith or just by sight? And that's the challenge for this morning. So if you've got something that you need God to do, if you've got a health issue, a finance issue, a relationship issue, and you need some help from God, I'm going to ask you to trust him. Get involved with what he's doing. Remember, it's an opportunity to work. And just trust him and see him work it out, even though you can't understand how he could ever do that. And it's a choice we make. Amen. I could finish there, but one or two people are kind of like completists. I won't tell you who they are. I won't name names. But they like everything tied up in my talks. And as I've got like 4 minutes left, I'll try and tie it up. Because although that's the big point, to walk by faith, not by sight. Remember where I started, none so blind as those that will not see. I want you to see how that story finishes. Because when we get to next week, we're heading towards the end. Yeah? There's one more miracle that is going to finally get everybody so angry that they want Jesus dead. So here we go. They took the man who had been blind to the Pharisees because it was on the Sabbath that Jesus had healed him. Stupid Jesus, healing again on the Sabbath, doing good things, you know, and made mud and healed him. The Pharisees asked the man all about it. So he told them, he put mud on my eyes, and when I washed it away, I could see. Okay, if you can understand that any better than he did, bless you. Some of the Pharisees said, interesting, only some of the Pharisees now. Some of the Pharisees, this man Jesus is not from God because he's working and doing good things on the Sabbath. Others said, but how could an ordinary sinner, because that's what you're calling him, how could an ordinary sinner do miraculous signs like that? So there was a deep division of opinion. There's a row, there's a riot going on. They're shouting at each other, arguing at each other. I don't know if any of them got to fisticuffs or, you know, but they're angry at each other. Jesus has totally polarized everybody. By the way, technically, Jesus hadn't broken any law by healing on the Sabbath. What he'd done is he'd broken an oral tradition that the Pharisees had built around the law, so you never went anywhere near the law. So he wasn't actually breaking the law at all. But they would rather protect their way of doing things than do good in helping others. There's a lesson for us there as churches in the UK. We need to prioritize others first, doing good for others. And sometimes we might have to bend our traditions to do that, because love is much more important than just the way we do things. Then the Pharisees again questioned the man who'd been blind and demanded, "What's your opinion about this man who healed you?" The man replied, "Well, I think he must be a prophet." The Jewish leaders still refused to believe there's none so blind as those who will not see. The Jewish leaders still refused to believe the man had been blind and could now see. So they go and find his parents. Like, how far will they go to protect what they want. They asked him, "Is this your son? Was he born blind? If so, how can he now see?" His parents, remember, this whole starts with everybody being terrified and not able to express any opinion on Jesus for fear of getting, like, the Pharisees coming down on like a ton of bricks. Replied, "We know this is our son and he was born blind. But we don't know how he can see or who healed him." His parents said this because they were still afraid of the Jewish leaders. That's so sad, isn't it? Fear of others, isn't it? It's powerful. It's easier sometimes to conform than to not conform and do good. I'll just leave that with you. Then they again interrogate the man. He's having a hard time he's born blind. He can see for the first time in his life, and everybody's giving him a hard time. "Look," the man exclaimed, "I told you once, didn't you listen to me? Like, what is wrong with you guys? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you actually want to follow Jesus?" And their response was, "We're not listening to you because you're a total sinner and we aren't. Why are you trying to teach us? Of course we don't want to follow Jesus because he's not doing what we want him to do." And so they threw this guy who can see for the first time in his life. The first thing that happens to him is he gets thrown out the synagogue. He gets thrown out of church because he didn't fit the picture. And that's so sad, isn't it? But it's also so true. Can I have the worship team back, please? You know, there is no one so blind as those who deny what they see, because it doesn't fit with what they claim they see. I'll say that again. There's none so blind as those who deny what they see, because it doesn't fit with what they claim they see. Let's stand. Because we don't want to be people like that, do we? We know which side of that crowd we want to stand on, don't we? So we have to keep our eyes open, keep them on Jesus, and walk by faith, not by sight. Amen.